Hi everyone. So let's go ahead, let's redo the brachial plexus. What I really want you guys to do again, get out a blank sheet of paper, try to follow along with me as we are redoing the brachial plexus. Obviously we went over it yesterday in lecture. We will go over it several more times. The other thing that I'm going to challenge you to do is as you get better with drawing this material, start pausing this recording and think about, okay, what is he going to draw next? What's going to be the next logical step? Because that will start forcing you to not only learn the material better, but start thinking in a forward fashion, such as I'm going to start seeing this next. So I challenge you to do that. I challenge you not just to passively watch the video. I challenge you to actively draw it with me, and then try to challenge yourself, because the more you challenge yourself with this material, the better you're going to get at it. So let's go ahead and get started here. And give me 1 second. Okay, so again, we're going to start off real nice, real easy here. Okay, we're going to start off with our roots. Remember that when we're talking about the roots, and I use air quotes, the roots of the brachial plexus equal ventral rami, not dorsal rami, not spinal nerves, not dorsal or ventral roots coming out of the spinal cord, but ventral rami. So we're going to start with C5, C6, C7, C8, T1. And we're going to draw the roots of each of those sections. 5, 6, 7, 8, T1. The first step of this process is that C5 and C6 come together to form the superior trunk. C7 stays by itself to form the middle trunk. C8, T1 come together to form the inferior trunk. So we have our roots first, our R down here. Now we have our trunks. Next are going to be the divisions. Remember that each trunk will have an anterior and a posterior division. The anterior division, which we're going to draw in red, from the middle trunk comes up to meet the anterior division. So we're going to draw a little A here and a little A here. My anterior division from my middle trunk meets my superior trunk's anterior division. The anterior division from my inferior trunk stays by itself. The posterior divisions, which we're going to draw in green, much different story. Posterior division from my middle trunk carries on, but it also picks up posterior division from my superior trunk and a posterior division from my inferior trunk. So again, look what we have here. My C5 and C6 come together to form the superior trunk. They then give off, the superior trunk gives off an anterior branch and a posterior branch. My middle trunk is made up by C7. It gives off an anterior branch and a posterior branch. My inferior trunk is made up by C8 and T1. It gives off an anterior division and a posterior division. Okay, so the anterior divisions and the posterior divisions of this section next. Now we're going to have chords. So what we're going to see is now we're going to have our chords delineated by C. And what we're going to see, no pun intended, is this. My posterior divisions come together and they form the posterior chord. Now remember that when we're talking about chords, I'm going to circle it, this is all in reference to the axillary artery. So my posterior chord is posterior to the axillary artery. My lateral chord continues on, and we're going to draw that guy all the way out to the end. And this is my lateral chord. My medial chord does the same thing. It continues on. My posterior chord, however, is going to terminate into two terminal branches. So we're going to draw B for branches. My posterior chord terminates into the axillary nerve and the radial nerve. AX being axillary, RAD being radial. So at this stage, start making those connections. Axillary nerve comes off of the posterior chord. The posterior chord is made up of the posterior divisions of the superior trunk, the middle trunk, and the inferior trunk. And you should be able to do this for every branch that we encounter. The lateral chord and the medial chord now are going to give off a branch each, and that itself will become its own terminal branch. That will terminate into the median nerve. The lateral chord itself will terminate into the musculocutaneous nerve, MCN, and my medial chord will terminate into the ulnar nerve. Remember, like we went over in lecture, these are the basics, okay? So from here, and this is kind of how we learn it backwards, let's think about it. Let's trace it back. My ulnar nerve comes from the medial chord, which is an anterior division of the inferior trunk, which has root levels at C8 and T1. My median nerve comes off of communicating branches from the lateral and medial chords, which are anterior divisions of C5, C6, C7, C8, and T1. So that's what I want you guys to do with this information is draw it out. Remember that this is a huge roadmap, and then start working it backwards. So start with those terminal branches and work it backwards. Okay, that's going to give you the best information and the best knowledge in the application of this material. Remember that when I said in lecture, it still holds true. It's not enough to know the brachial plexus. It's also not enough just to draw it. You have to know how to use this stuff. So now let's get into the more intricate or specialized nerves. First one, super duper easy. We're going to draw C5, C6, C7 with these tiny little communication branches just to delineate the fact that it's coming off of those root levels. And this is going to be my LTN, or long thoracic nerve. My long thoracic nerve comes directly off of the C5, C6, and C7 ventral rami. Makes a lot of sense. We've talked about this earlier. Serratus anterior is innervated by the long thoracic nerve. Long thoracic nerve is part of the innervation for my superficial back muscles, which are innervated by ventral rami. So moving on from there, now we're going to start getting into the specialized nerves that come off of each of my cords. Remember that I'm going to have a little special one here. NS is going to be my nervus subclavius. I'm also going to have a DSN, or dorsal scapular nerve. I'm also, off of my superior trunk, I'm going to have suprascapular nerve. Also, coming off of my lateral cord, I'm going to have my lateral pectoral nerve. Lateral cord's a little weird. Remember that it's going to have 4 of these branches. Okay, or I should say this upper section is going to have 4 of these branches. My posterior cord is going to follow rule of 3. I'm going to have 3 branches come off, and I draw them just like this. My 3 branches that come off the posterior cord are the upper subscapular nerve, lower subscapular nerve. TDN stands for thoracodorsal nerve. So again, what I want you to do is trace it back. My upper subscapular nerve comes off of my posterior cord. My posterior cord is made up of the posterior divisions of the superior, middle, and inferior trunks. My lateral pectoral nerve comes off of my lateral cord. My lateral cord is made up of the anterior divisions of C5, C6, and C7, or more specifically, the anterior divisions of the superior trunk and the middle trunk. My superior trunk is made up by C5 and C6 coming together, and my middle trunk is made up by C7. That's how I want you to go through this information. So don't just work it forward from the root to the terminal branch, work it backwards from the branch to the root. Off of my medial cord, I'm again going to have 3 more branches. These ones are a little weird in nature, okay? So I kind of draw them out kind of in that fashion. One that I'm going to have, since I have a lateral pectoral nerve, well, by gosh, I better have a medial pectoral nerve too. I'm also going to have a medial brachial nerve, brachial cutaneous nerve. And I'm going to have a medial antebrachial cutaneous nerve. I understand in lecture that I drew these 3 branches specifically off of the medial cord in a different format. I've made the decision to draw them in this format. However, what you will see is that there's going to be some variations from exactly where they come off the cord. The reason I've chosen this format is because I think this is probably a better representation that my more proximal structures, such as my pectoralis major and my pectoralis minor, which receive innervation from my medial pectoral nerve, those structures are more proximal than my medial brachial cutaneous area and my medial antebrachial cutaneous area. So again, look at the information, understand the information. Also understand how to use the information, okay? It's not going to be enough to understand how to draw it. It's not going to be enough to understand the names of all this information. What you will have to do is you will have to start using this information. The format that we're going to start using this information is going to be very similar to what we've already gone over. We're going to play the uh-oh, it's gone game again. For example, my lateral cord is gone. What would I expect to see? What problems would I expect to see? Would the musculocutaneous nerve be absent? Or the muscles that are innervated by musculocutaneous nerve, would those be absent? Would my median nerve be affected? Would my ulnar nerve be affected? These are things we need to know. So that's exactly how I want you to study the information, is know how to draw it, be able to reproduce this picture, but then start applying it to hypothetical clinical scenarios. I hope this really kind of clears things up. I hope that you take the time and really learn this brachial plexus over the weekend, and we'll dive into this much later next week in lecture.